In this video, we're going to be going over the Detective, which is one of the strongest classes in the game, if not the very strongest class in the game, and that's because you're effective at nearly any range, so whether you're close, medium, or long range, you're quite powerful. The Detective really focuses on click timing or flick style aiming, unlike some of the other classes like the full auto classes that rely heavily on tracking. The fun thing about the Detective is that your main weapon is the pistol. So it's not too common in shooter games where your main weapon is a pistol, but it's really fun when it is. So it should feel very familiar to players that play games like Overwatch and use McCree with the Revolver. If you play Apex Legends, it should feel similar to the Wingman. If you play TF2, you should feel somewhat like the Spy. And if you play Halo Combat Evolved, it's very much like the original Halo pistol. So shout out to anyone who knows what that is. Now let's dive into what makes the Detective so strong. So starting off, you have 100 HP, which is just about average. But you do have a fast movement speed, so you're faster than classes like the Triggerman, which really helps you outrun enemies and flank and make yourself harder to hit. Moving on to the Revolver. The Revolver does base damage of 63 damage per shot on body shots. So of course that's multiplied by about 1/3 when you land a headshot, and there's a slight debuff when you land arm or leg shots. You have 6 rounds per clip. It's not the most, but at least the good thing is that your reload speed is quite fast. And then the rate of fire is 1 shot for every 350 milliseconds. And important note here is that the Detective previously had a rate of fire of 300 milliseconds per shot, but was recently nerfed to 350 milliseconds per shot. I think that the Detective is still very strong despite this nerf. To put that in comparison, if you look at something like the Deagle has a rate of fire of 400 milliseconds. So the rate of fire of the Revolver is still quite good. So moving on to some of the Detective strengths. The first is that you really don't have any matchups that are too bad. There are some matchups that you're arguably disadvantaged in, but as long as you have good aim, you're effective at any range and you have a chance to win. So to expand upon that, the other strength of the Detective is that you're the soft counter to a hunter. And by no means does this mean that you're going to always beat a hunter. In fact, a good hunter can consistently beat a Detective, but let me explain. So both the hunter and the Detective can one-shot body shot each other, but you have 6 shots in a magazine, whereas the hunter has 3. So it's technically easier for you to land that shot. And so that's why I would say that you soft counter the hunter. So the last strength that I want to discuss when it comes to the Detective is your very high burst damage. So unlike the full auto classes that require that you track the enemy to deal the full DPS, you have a really high one-shot damage. So this allows you to kind of like peek a corner without fully risking your body and deal high DPS. So now I'm going to be talking about some Detective tips. So the first thing that you want to understand with the Detective is how to aim and how recoil works. So first thing I'm going to do is look at a wall, aim down sights, and spam click. Now it looks pretty good, but let me back up a bit. So they're actually very, very slight recoil. It's pretty much negligible. You can see that these 2 bullets, even though I was aiming down sights, are a little bit spread apart. Again, you know, this is pretty negligible. So anytime you're ADS, you're going to be pretty accurate. Next, hip fire test. Spam hip fire. The spread is like really high, and actually if you jump, the spread's even higher. So essentially you just want to be aiming down sights all the time. There's a little trick. So obviously everyone knows like quick scope with like a hunter. So I recommend that you kind of do a quick scope with a Detective as well. And if you actually quick scope too quickly, like this is going to happen, and you'll see that the scope ADS accuracy buff has not kicked in yet. So you want to practice by like right clicking and then like doing a left click right after, so you can kind of like quick scope, get that accuracy bonus, and quickly land your shots. In terms of aiming for body shots versus headshots, for me personally, I just aim for headshots. You know, the exception is if you're playing 1 versus 1 competitive mode and points don't really matter. then you could aim for body shots, especially against Hunter. But if you're playing a public lobby, you should just aim for headshots because you'll get that point bonus. If you prefer and if you think it's easier for you, you could do a body shot followed by a headshot when you're fighting against 100 HP classes. The next detective tip that's really important is knowing when to disengage in a fight. So if you're full HP, you have a pretty good chance fighting against just about anyone. But if I'm like 30 HP and I'm fighting against a full auto class, like in that situation, you should just run away and let your health regen. Because again, you know that your time to kill is going to be at least like 300 milliseconds, and they're going to kill you faster, you know, if they don't have completely potato aim. So you need to learn how to run away, utilize your move speed to your advantage, and fight for another day. It's even more important that you know when to run away, especially since you do not have a secondary weapon. So you have to be able to duck away, reload, and then re-engage in the fight. Another tip that I want to talk about is advanced movement techniques, and to use those techniques to the full potential with Detective. In one of my earlier videos, like with the Triggerman for example, I didn't really know Krunker movement that well, and Kato, he called me out in one of the videos saying that I should jump and slide more, and I'm glad that he did because I was wrong about Krunker movement. So since then, I've gotten a bit better at how to move Krunker, and I think that this is extremely important with Detective, even more so than other classes. And you can take advantage of peeking around corners with really high speeds and pop off a shot with high burst damage to an even greater degree than the full auto class. Since you have really high burst damage, you could be flying around the corner and then like one tap someone and then duck away from cover, whereas in order to dish out the same amount of damage, a Triggerman, run and gun, LMG would have to track the enemy. And I think one of the best ways to demonstrate this technique is on the Sub-Zero map, because I can gain some speed. And then as I'm going through that opening, I could take a shot. Since I'm moving very quickly, I put my body at less risk than if I were just to slowly peek the corner. So for my last tip, I'm going to explain to you how to go full Tryhard mode with the Detective. And you're going to need the official Krunker client for this. And what you're going to want to do is disable your gun model. You could also do it in the web browser as well, but it's not quite as effective because you don't have a red dot. This is even more important with the Detective compared to other classes because unlike like the run and gun and Triggerman, you don't have a red dot sight, so your gun model blocks some of your view of the enemy. So go into utilities and customize your crosshair. I just do custom rather than normal and custom. I like to do a filled circle with a length of 4 and a thickness of 4, but whatever your preference is fine. And then you go into options, and then you disable show weapon. And then now I'm in full Tryhard mode. So now my gun model no longer blocks my field of view, and I could easily see the enemy. I prefer not to play this way. I think it's like, makes it less fun. But if you really are playing competitively, then I recommend you give it a try. Another reason why this is like good to do with the Detective is that you don't have a secondary weapon, so you never have to worry about which weapon you're using. I know that there is an indicator in like the bottom right of your screen, but you don't even have to like look down to see what weapon you're using because you always are using the Revolver. So those are some of my Detective tips. Overall, I feel that the Detective is a really strong, but also a relatively balanced class. And it's the perfect class if you're going to go full Tryhard mode, whether you're playing competitively or in public lobbies. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you do, please like and subscribe.